A boy froze to death on the street with his puppy, and a miracle happened that made everyone cry. The cardboard box smelled of old newspapers and damp earth. It wasn't much, but it was all Max had. Buddy, a scruffy terrier mix with eyes full of unconditional love, snuggled closer to Max, seeking warmth against the biting wind. He was just a puppy, barely 4 months old, and the streets were a whirlwind of unfamiliar scents and sounds. This was their first night out here. Buddy didn't understand why they'd left the small apartment with the peeling paint and the grumpy landlord. He missed the squeaky toys Max used to play with him, the soft blanket on the floor, and the bowl that always magically refilled with kibble. Now, there was only the cold, hard ground and the constant rumble of unseen vehicles. Buddy whimpered, his tiny body shivering.
Max.
A boy of 10 with a mop of unruly brown hair and eyes that held the weight of the world, wrapped his arms tighter around Buddy. "It's okay, boy," Max whispered, his voice cracking. "We'll be all right. I'll take care of you." Buddy licked Max's face, his tail giving a hopeful thump against the cardboard. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the love that resonated in Max's voice. It was the same tone Max used when he shared his meager meals with Buddy, when he scratched behind Buddy's ears, when he called Buddy his best friend. The night was long and filled with strange noises. Buddy heard the distant wail of sirens, the clatter of garbage cans being overturned, and the occasional shout that made him cower. He pressed closer to Max, seeking comfort in the boy's warmth. Max, despite his own fear and uncertainty, stroked Buddy's fur, humming a lullaby his mother used to sing. He closed his eyes, picturing his mother's smiling face, her gentle touch, the smell of her freshly baked cookies. The memories were bittersweet, a reminder of a life that seemed so far away now. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Buddy stirred. He watched as Max woke up, his eyes filled with a weariness that belied his young age. Max sat up, stretching his stiff limbs, and looked down at Buddy. "Morning, Buddy," Max said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Time to start the day." Buddy wagged his tail, his spirits lifting at the sight of Max's smile. He didn't know what the day would bring, but he knew that as long as he had Max by his side, he could face anything. They crawled out of the box, the cold morning air making them shiver. Max rummaged through a tattered backpack, pulling out a crumpled bag of chips. He shared the chips with Buddy, who gobbled them down gratefully. "We need to find some food, Buddy," Max said, his voice determined, "and maybe a better place to sleep tonight." Buddy barked in agreement, his tail wagging excitedly. He was ready to face whatever challenges the day brought, as long as he had Max by his side. They were in this together, a boy and his dog, two souls bound by an unbreakable bond of friendship and love. The city was a maze of towering buildings and endless sidewalks. Buddy, trotting alongside Max, found it both fascinating and frightening. The smells were overwhelming, a mix of exhaust fumes, discarded food, and something pungent he couldn't quite place. The noises were even more confusing. The honking of cars, the chatter of pedestrians, the distant sirens that seemed to wail endlessly. Max, with Buddy trailing behind, navigated the crowded streets with a sense of purpose. He held his head high, trying to project an air of confidence, but Buddy could sense the fear and uncertainty lurking beneath the surface. They walked for what seemed like hours, stopping occasionally to rummage through trash cans for scraps of food. Buddy watched, his tail drooping, as Max was shooed away from a bakery, the baker's harsh words echoing in the air. "No dogs allowed," the baker had yelled, his face contorted in anger. "Get out of here, you filthy mutt." Buddy cowered behind Max, his ears flattening against his head. He didn't understand the man's anger. He just wanted a small piece of bread, a crumb to ease the gnawing hunger in his belly. Max, his cheeks flushed with shame, pulled Buddy away. "It's okay, boy," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "We'll find something else." They continued their journey, passing by bustling shops with their brightly lit windows, filled with things Buddy couldn't comprehend. He saw people dressed in fine clothes, their faces etched with indifference, their eyes sliding past Max and Buddy as if they were invisible. Buddy felt a pang of sadness. He longed for the warmth of a home, the comfort of a soft bed, the security of a full belly. But most of all, he longed for a kind word, a gentle touch, a moment of recognition. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city streets, Max led Buddy to a small park tucked away between towering buildings. They found a secluded spot under a large oak tree, its branches reaching out like protective arms. Max curled up on the ground, using his backpack as a pillow. Buddy snuggled close, seeking warmth and comfort. The park was quieter than the streets, but there were still sounds that made Buddy uneasy. The rustling of leaves, the hooting of an owl, the distant laughter of children playing in a nearby playground. Max closed his eyes, his breathing shallow and uneven. Buddy watched him, his heart filled with worry. He licked Max's hand, hoping to offer some comfort. Max opened his eyes and looked at Buddy, a faint smile flickering across his lips. "Thanks, Buddy," he whispered. "You're the best friend a guy could ask for." Buddy wagged his tail, his heart swelling with love for the boy who was his whole world. He didn't understand the complexities of their situation, the hardships they faced. All he knew was that he loved Max, and he would stay by his side no matter what. The aroma of freshly baked bread, warm and inviting, wafted through the air, pulling Buddy's attention. He tugged gently on Max's worn leash, his tail wagging with anticipation. Max, his stomach rumbling in agreement, followed Buddy's lead. They found themselves in front of a quaint little bakery, its window display filled with tempting pastries and loaves of bread. Hesitantly, Max approached the bakery, his eyes fixed on the ground. He remembered the harsh words from the previous baker, the sting of rejection still fresh in his mind. But the hunger pangs were too strong to ignore, and the enticing smell of bread was too tempting to resist. As they neared the entrance, the door swung open, and a woman emerged, her arms laden with a basket overflowing with baked goods. She was an elderly woman, her face etched with wrinkles that spoke of a life well lived, her eyes twinkling with kindness. Buddy, his senses heightened, felt a wave of warmth emanating from the woman. He wagged his tail excitedly, drawn to her gentle aura. The woman stopped, her gaze falling upon Max and Buddy. A soft smile spread across her face. "Well, hello there," she greeted them, her voice as warm as the bread she carried. "Aren't you a handsome pair?" Max, taken aback by her kindness, stammered a greeting. The woman's smile widened. "You both look a little hungry," she observed, her eyes filled with concern. "Would you like some bread?" Max's eyes lit up. He nodded shyly, his cheeks flushing with gratitude. The woman reached into her basket, pulling out a crusty loaf of bread. She broke it in half, handing a piece to Max and a smaller piece to Buddy. Buddy devoured the bread, savoring the taste of warmth and kindness. He looked up at the woman, his tail wagging gratefully. She chuckled, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "You're a good boy," she said, her voice filled with affection. "What's your name?" "His name is Buddy," Max replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "And I'm Max." "It's nice to meet you, Max and Buddy," the woman said. "My name is Emily." Emily chatted with Max, her gentle questions drawing him out of his shell. She learned about their situation, their homelessness, their search for a safe haven. Her heart ached for the young boy and his loyal companion. "Why don't you come inside for a bit?" Emily offered. "It's getting chilly out here." Max hesitated, his instincts warning him against trusting strangers. But something in Emily's eyes, a sincerity that he couldn't deny, reassured him. He nodded, and Emily led them into the bakery. The warmth of the bakery enveloped them like a comforting hug. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air, mingling with the sweet scent of cinnamon and sugar. Buddy, overwhelmed by the sensory overload, pressed close to Max, seeking reassurance. Emily offered them a seat at a small table near the window. She brought them warm milk and more bread, insisting they eat as much as they wanted. Buddy lapped up the milk, his tail wagging contentedly. He felt safe and cared for, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. As they ate, Emily chatted with Max, her words filled with encouragement and hope. She told him about the local shelter, a place where they could find temporary accommodation and assistance.
Max listened intently,
a glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes. When it was time to leave, Emily packed a bag with bread and pastries for them to take with them. She hugged Max goodbye, her embrace warm and comforting. She knelt down and scratched Buddy behind the ears, her eyes filled with kindness. "Take care, you two," she said, "and don't give up hope." Max and Buddy stepped back out into the chilly evening air, their hearts filled with gratitude for Emily's kindness. They had found a moment of respite, a beacon of hope in the midst of their struggles. And Buddy knew, with a certainty that only a dog could possess, that Emily would not be the last kind soul they encountered on their journey. The city, once a daunting labyrinth, was slowly becoming familiar to Buddy. He knew the best alleys for scavenging scraps, the parks where friendly squirrels sometimes dropped nuts, and the quiet corners where Max could rest undisturbed. But familiarity didn't make their situation any less precarious. Each day was a struggle for survival, a constant search for food, shelter, and a glimmer of hope. Max, despite his young age, was resourceful and determined. He spent his days scouring the streets for help-wanted signs, his heart sinking with each rejection. He tried his luck at odd jobs, offering to carry groceries, walk dogs, or mow lawns. But most people turned him away, their faces hardened with suspicion or indifference. Buddy watched, his heart aching for Max. He wished he could help, could somehow magically conjure up a home, a job, a solution to their predicament. But all he could do was stay by Max's side, offering silent support and unconditional love. One day, Max stumbled upon a community center with a sign that read, "Free meals and assistance." His heart leaped with hope. He clutched Buddy's leash tightly and entered the center, his steps hesitant but determined. The center was bustling with activity. People of all ages and backgrounds milled about, some chatting animatedly, others lost in their own thoughts. Max approached the front desk, his voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me," he said, his eyes downcast. "I saw the sign outside, about free meals." The woman at the desk, her face etched with compassion, smiled warmly. "Of course, honey," she said. "You've come to the right place. We offer hot meals every day, and we also have resources to help people in need." Max's heart swelled with gratitude. He felt a flicker of hope ignite within him, a belief that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change for the better. The woman led Max and Buddy to a small dining area where they were served a hot meal of soup and sandwiches. Buddy, his stomach growling with anticipation, devoured his food with gusto. He watched as Max ate slowly, savoring each bite, a look of contentment on his face. After the meal, the woman sat down with Max, asking him about his situation. Max, hesitant at first, gradually opened up, sharing his story of homelessness and his search for a safe haven. The woman listened patiently, her eyes filled with understanding. She told Max about the various programs the center offered, including temporary housing, job training, and counseling services. She gave him a list of shelters and other organizations that could help. Max listened intently, his mind buzzing with possibilities. As they left the community center, Max felt a renewed sense of hope. He had found a place where people cared, a place where he could find support and guidance. He clutched the list of resources tightly, his heart filled with determination. Buddy, sensing Max's newfound optimism, trotted alongside him, his tail wagging excitedly. He knew that their journey was far from over, but he also knew that they were not alone. There were people who cared, people who wanted to help. And with their support, Max and Buddy could face the future with courage and hope. The shelter was a world away from the streets, yet it presented its own set of challenges for Buddy. The cacophony of barking dogs, the unfamiliar smells of disinfectant and too many animals in close quarters, the echoing voices of stressed humans. It was overwhelming. He clung to Max's side, his tail tucked low, his senses bombarded. Max, though apprehensive himself, tried to reassure Buddy. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, stroking Buddy's fur. "We're safe here." But safe felt different than Max's reassuring voice. There were rules here, stern-faced people who spoke in clipped tones, and a rigid schedule that revolved around mealtimes and lights out. Buddy missed the freedom of the open sky, the unpredictable rhythm of their street life. The other dogs were a mixed bunch. Some were friendly, wagging their tails and sniffing Buddy with curious noses. Others were wary, growling and baring their teeth, establishing their territory. Buddy, used to being Max's sole companion, found this canine hierarchy confusing and intimidating. He learned to navigate the communal yard, avoiding the grumpy bulldog with the scarred nose and befriending a playful Labrador puppy who reminded him of his own puppyhood. He discovered the joy of chasing squirrels that dared to venture into the fenced-in area, and the comfort of shared naps with Max on the thin cot provided to them. The humans were a different story. Some, like the kind lady who served them meals with a smile, offered a fleeting sense of comfort. Others, their faces etched with worry or burdened by their own troubles, seemed to barely notice Buddy. He missed the simple connection he had with Max, the unspoken understanding that passed between them. One evening, as Max sat on the edge of his cot, his shoulders slumped with dejection, Buddy nudged his hand, whining softly. Max looked down, his eyes meeting Buddy's. A faint smile touched his lips. "I know, Buddy," he said, his voice heavy with weariness. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing, right?" Buddy licked Max's hand, his tail giving a hesitant thump against the cot. He didn't understand the complexities of their situation, the lack of privacy, the constant noise, the underlying tension that permeated the shelter. But he understood Max's sadness, and he offered his unwavering companionship as a silent balm. As the days turned into weeks, Buddy began to adapt to shelter life. He learned to tolerate the barking, the crowds, the unfamiliar routines. He found solace in the small joys, a shared meal with Max, a friendly game of chase with the Labrador puppy, a moment of quiet companionship under the watchful gaze of the night sky. And through it all, he never lost sight of his purpose. To be there for Max, to offer him comfort and love, to remind him that even in the midst of hardship, they had each other. The shelter yard, a patch of worn grass enclosed by a chain-link fence, was a microcosm of the city itself, a melting pot of different personalities, backgrounds, and stories. Buddy, now accustomed to the canine hierarchy, navigated the social dynamics with a mix of caution and curiosity. He had his regular playmates, the Labrador puppy, a goofy golden retriever with a perpetually wagging tail, and a shy beagle who preferred to observe from the sidelines. But one day, a new arrival caught Buddy's attention. It was a boy about Max's age, with a mop of curly red hair and freckles sprinkled across his nose. He sat on a bench, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the ground. Buddy, sensing a kindred spirit, trotted over to him, his tail wagging tentatively. The boy looked up, startled by Buddy's approach. A hesitant smile touched his lips. He reached out a hand, and Buddy, after a moment of hesitation, licked it tentatively. "Hey there, fella," the boy said, his voice soft and friendly. "You're a good dog, aren't you?" Buddy wagged his tail, encouraged by the boy's gentle touch. He sat down beside him, leaning against his leg. The boy, his initial shyness fading, scratched Buddy behind the ears, his fingers finding the spot that always made Buddy's leg thump with pleasure. "What's your name?" the boy asked, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. Buddy, of course, couldn't answer, but just then, Max appeared, his face etched with concern. He had been searching for Buddy, worried that he had wandered off. "Buddy!" Max exclaimed, relief flooding his voice. "There you are. I was worried about you." He noticed the boy sitting beside Buddy, and his expression shifted to one of cautious curiosity. "Hi," the boy said, a shy smile returning to his face. "I'm Liam. This is your dog." "Yeah," Max replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "His name is Buddy." Liam and Max struck up a conversation, their initial awkwardness quickly dissolving. They discovered a shared love of animals, a common ground that transcended their different backgrounds. Liam, it turned out, had been living at the shelter for a few weeks, his family struggling with financial difficulties. Buddy watched as Max and Liam chatted, their laughter filling the air. He felt a sense of warmth spread through him, a feeling of camaraderie and shared experience. He had found a friend for Max, a companion who understood the challenges they faced. Over the next few days, Max and Liam became inseparable. They shared meals, played games in the yard, and confided in each other about their hopes and fears. Buddy was always by their side, a silent observer of their growing friendship. He enjoyed their playful wrestling matches, their animated conversations, their shared moments of laughter and sadness. He felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that he was part of something bigger than himself. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the shelter yard, Max and Liam sat side by side, their shoulders touching. Buddy lay at their feet, his head resting on Max's lap. "I'm glad we met, Liam," Max said, his voice soft and sincere. "Me too, Max," Liam replied. "You're the best friend I've ever had." Buddy, his heart swelling with affection, licked Max's hand. He knew that their friendship was a precious gift, a beacon of light in the midst of their uncertain future. And he, as their loyal companion, would be there to share in their joys and sorrows, their triumphs and setbacks, their journey towards a brighter tomorrow. The shelter, with its rigid routines and crowded spaces, felt stifling at times. Buddy longed for the freedom of the open streets, the thrill of exploring new scents and sounds. One afternoon, while Max was busy helping in the shelter kitchen, Buddy saw his chance. A delivery truck had arrived, its doors momentarily left open. With a burst of impulsive energy, Buddy slipped past the distracted driver and darted out into the bustling city streets. Freedom! He ran, the wind whipping through his fur, the familiar sights and smells of the city flooding his senses. But the initial exhilaration soon gave way to confusion. The streets were a maze, the traffic a cacophony of honking horns and screeching tires. Buddy, disoriented and overwhelmed, realized he had no idea where he was or how to get back to Max. Fear gnawed at him. He missed Max's reassuring presence, the warmth of his touch, the sound of his voice. He wandered aimlessly, his nose twitching, trying to pick up Max's scent amidst the overwhelming urban odors. He dodged pedestrians, narrowly avoided being hit by a speeding bicycle, and cowered from the angry shouts of a street vendor whose cart he had accidentally bumped. The city, once a familiar playground, had become a menacing jungle. Hunger gnawed at his belly. He rummaged through overflowing trash cans, finding scraps of discarded food that barely satisfied his hunger. He longed for the regular meals at the shelter, the bowl of kibble that Max always shared with him. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the city, Buddy's fear intensified. The streets became darker, the noises more ominous. He sought refuge in a narrow alleyway, huddling between two overflowing dumpsters, his body trembling with cold and fear. He whimpered, his cries echoing in the emptiness of the alley. He missed Max desperately, the boy who was his whole world, his protector, his friend. He closed his eyes, picturing Max's face, his gentle touch, his reassuring voice. Suddenly, a sound pierced the silence, a familiar whistle, a sound that sent a jolt of hope through Buddy's weary heart. He lifted his head, his ears perked, his eyes searching the darkness. The whistle came again, closer this time. Buddy scrambled to his feet, his tail wagging tentatively. He peered out of the alley, his heart pounding with anticipation. And there, in the dim light of a street lamp, stood Max, his face etched with worry, his eyes scanning the streets frantically. "Buddy!" he called out, his voice filled with relief. "Buddy!" "Where are you?" Buddy barked, a joyous sound that echoed through the night. He ran towards Max, his paws pounding the pavement, his heart overflowing with joy. Max knelt down, his arms outstretched. Buddy leaped into his embrace, licking his face, whimpering with happiness. Max hugged him tightly, burying his face in Buddy's fur. "Buddy, you scared me,"
Max exclaimed.
his voice choked with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you," Buddy whimpered, nuzzling closer to Max, his body trembling with relief. He had found his way back to the boy who was his home, his safety, his love. As they walked back to the shelter, hand in paw, Buddy vowed never to stray again. He had learned a valuable lesson: freedom was meaningless without Max by his side. Their bond was stronger than any adventure, more precious than any fleeting thrill. They were two souls intertwined, a boy and his dog, forever connected by a love that transcended the hardships of their lives. The fear of losing Buddy had shaken Max to his core. He realized how much he depended on his furry companion, not just for company but for a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. He vowed to be more vigilant, to never let Buddy out of his sight again. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A few days after Buddy's escapade, a fire broke out in the shelter kitchen. The blaze, though quickly contained, caused enough chaos and confusion to disrupt the usual order. In the midst of the commotion, with alarms blaring and people rushing about, Buddy got separated from Max again. This time, however, there was no open truck door, no momentary lapse in attention. Buddy was simply swept away by the tide of panicked humans and animals, his leash slipping from Max's grasp in the confusion. He found himself alone, amidst the swirling smoke and the terrified cries of his fellow shelter residents. Instinct took over. He ran, his heart pounding, his senses overwhelmed by the acrid smell of smoke and the deafening noise. He burst out of the shelter doors and into the night, the city lights a dizzying blur. He didn't look back, didn't try to find Max. All he knew was that he had to escape the danger, the suffocating smoke, the overwhelming fear. He ran until his lungs burned and his paws ached. He found himself in an unfamiliar part of the city, a maze of dark alleys and deserted streets. The fear of being lost was replaced by a primal instinct for survival. He scavenged for food, his nose leading him to discarded scraps behind restaurants and overflowing trash cans. He learned to avoid the dangers of the city, the speeding cars, the unfriendly humans, the territorial stray dogs. He discovered a hidden world, a network of alleyways and abandoned buildings where other stray animals sought refuge. He encountered a one-eared tomcat who taught him the art of stealth, a pack of scruffy dogs who shared their hunting grounds, and a wise old Labrador who showed him the best places to find water. He learned to rely on his senses, his nose guiding him to food and shelter, his ears alerting him to danger, his instincts telling him when to fight and when to flee. He became a survivor, a creature of the urban jungle, adapting to the harsh realities of his new life. But even as he honed his survival skills, a part of him longed for Max. He missed the warmth of Max's touch, the sound of his voice, the comfort of their shared companionship. He would often lie awake at night, his ears perked, listening for a familiar whistle, a sign that Max was searching for him. One day, while scavenging for food near a bustling market, Buddy caught a scent that sent his heart racing. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable Max's scent. He followed the scent, his nose twitching, his paws pounding the pavement. The scent led him to a park, a familiar haven where he and Max had often sought refuge during their early days on the streets. He entered the park cautiously, his senses alert, his heart pounding with anticipation. And there, sitting on a bench, his shoulders slumped, his eyes filled with sadness, was Max. Buddy's heart leaped with joy. He ran towards Max, barking excitedly, his tail wagging furiously. Max looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Buddy?" he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Is it really you?" Buddy leaped into Max's arms, licking his face, whimpering with happiness. Max hugged him tightly, burying his face in Buddy's fur. "Buddy, I thought I'd lost you forever," he sobbed. Buddy whimpered, nuzzling closer to Max, his body trembling with relief. He had found his way back to the boy who was his home, his safety, his love. He had survived the ordeal, the loneliness, the dangers of the city, and he had returned, stronger and wiser. His bond with Max deepened by their shared experience of loss and reunion. The reunion with Max was a joyous moment, a balm to Buddy's weary soul, but it was also a stark reminder of the precariousness of their situation. They were still homeless, still struggling to survive, still searching for a place to call home. Max, however, seemed different. The despair that had clouded his eyes had been replaced by a newfound determination. He held Buddy close, his grip firm but gentle, his voice filled with resolve. "We're going to be okay, Buddy," he whispered, his breath warm against Buddy's fur. "I promise." Buddy, sensing the shift in Max's demeanor, wagged his tail hopefully. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the unwavering belief that resonated in Max's voice. They left the park, hand in paw, their steps purposeful, their spirits lifted. Max, guided by a renewed sense of hope, led Buddy towards the community center, the place where they had found kindness and support before. The woman at the front desk, her face etched with concern, greeted them with a warm smile. She listened intently as Max recounted their ordeal, the fire, the separation, the reunion. Her eyes filled with tears as she heard of Buddy's survival, his resilience, his unwavering loyalty. She assured Max that they would do everything they could to help. She offered them temporary accommodation at the center, a small room with a cot and a warm blanket. She provided them with food, clothing, and a sense of security they hadn't felt in a long time.
Max,
overwhelmed by the kindness, expressed his gratitude with a sincerity that touched the woman's heart. He vowed to work hard, to find a job, to repay their kindness in any way he could. Buddy, curled up at Max's feet, felt a sense of peace settle over him. He was no longer a stray, a creature of the streets. He was home with Max, surrounded by people who cared. The days that followed were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Max, with the support of the community center staff, enrolled in a job training program. He learned new skills, gained confidence, and discovered a passion for carpentry. Buddy, his loyal companion, accompanied Max to his classes, his presence a source of comfort and encouragement. He watched with pride as Max mastered new tools, his hands transforming raw wood into beautiful creations. In the evenings, they would return to their small room at the center, exhausted but content. Max would read to Buddy, sharing stories of adventure and hope, his voice soothing Buddy's weary soul. One day, Max received news that brought a wide grin to his face. He had been offered a job, an apprenticeship with a local carpenter. The pay was modest, but the opportunity was immense. It was a chance to build a future, a life of stability and purpose. Max shared the news with Buddy, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Buddy, sensing Max's joy, barked happily, his tail wagging furiously. He knew that this was a turning point, a step towards a brighter tomorrow. They celebrated with a simple meal, shared with the other residents of the community center. There was laughter, congratulations, and a sense of shared triumph. Max and Buddy, once lost and alone, had found a community, a place where they belonged. As they prepared for their new life, their new home, their new beginning, Max looked at Buddy, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it, Buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We made it." Buddy licked Max's hand, his tail thumping against the floor. He knew that their journey was far from over, but they had faced the challenges, overcome the obstacles, and emerged stronger. Their bond unbreakable, their love unwavering. They were ready for whatever the future held. Together, a boy and his dog, forever bound by a friendship that had weathered the storms and found its way to a brighter horizon. The small apartment was a far cry from the shelter, a haven of peace and privacy. It wasn't much, just a single room with a kitchenette and a tiny bathroom. But it was theirs. Max, with his first paycheck clutched tightly in his hand, had signed the lease with a sense of pride and accomplishment. Buddy explored their new home with a wagging tail and a curious nose. He sniffed every corner, investigated every nook and cranny, claiming the space as his own. He particularly loved the small patch of sunlight that streamed through the window, a perfect spot for afternoon naps. Life had settled into a comfortable routine. Max worked diligently at his carpentry apprenticeship, his skills growing with each passing day. He would leave in the morning, Buddy by his side, and return in the evening, his face tired but content. Buddy, no longer a stray scavenging for scraps, enjoyed regular meals and the occasional treat. He had a new leash, a soft bed, and a collection of squeaky toys that Max had bought him from a thrift store. But more than the material comforts, Buddy cherished the stability, the sense of belonging. He no longer had to worry about finding food or shelter, no longer had to fear the dangers of the streets. He had a home, a family, a purpose. He would spend his days waiting for Max. His ears perked at the sound of footsteps in the hallway. When Max returned, Buddy would greet him with enthusiastic barks and joyful leaps, his tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled. Their evenings were filled with simple pleasures. Max would cook dinner, sharing his meal with Buddy. They would play fetch in the nearby park, Buddy chasing the frisbee with boundless energy. And in the quiet moments, they would sit together, Max reading aloud or simply sharing companionable silence. Max, with the support of his mentor and the community center, continued to thrive. He learned new skills, took on more responsibilities, and earned the respect of his colleagues. He even started saving money, dreaming of one day owning his own workshop. Buddy, his loyal companion, was always by his side, a silent witness to Max's growth and accomplishments. He was there to celebrate the successes, to offer comfort during the setbacks, to remind Max that he was never alone. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through the park, Max stopped, his gaze fixed on a group of children playing with their dogs. A wistful smile touched his lips. "You know, Buddy," he said, his voice soft and thoughtful, "I used to dream of having a dog like you when I was a kid. I never imagined we'd go through so much together, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." Buddy, sensing the emotion in Max's voice, nudged his hand, licking his fingers. He didn't need words to express his love, his loyalty, his gratitude. He was content to be with Max, sharing his life, his journey, his dreams. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Max and Buddy made their way back home, their steps in sync, their hearts connected. They were no longer just a boy and his dog. They were a family, bound by a love that had weathered the storms and found its way to a brighter future. They had faced adversity, endured hardship, and emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable, their spirits resilient. They were a testament to the power of friendship, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unwavering love between a boy and his dog.
A stressed man was saved by a stray cat that wandered into his house. What happened next surprised everyone. What if salvation wandered in on four paws when you least expected it? When a stressed widower collapses alone, a stray cat becomes his unlikely savior by alerting a neighbor. But the truly shocking twist isn't the rescue. It's discovering the cat's secret connection to the man's lost love, unlocking a second chance he never thought possible. Subscribe, like, and listen now to the incredible story of Cheddar's return. The pressure seized David Chin's chest first, a vice tightening with vicious intensity. He gasped, stumbling back from his drafting table, scattering architectural plans across the polished hardwood floor of his study. The room tilted violently, the familiar lines of bookshelves and window frames blurring into a nauseating vortex. He reached out, trying to steady himself, but his legs buckled. He crashed to the floor, the impact jarring through his body, landing half in, half out of the doorway leading to the living room. Panic clawed at his throat. He couldn't draw a full breath. Sharp, stabbing pains radiated down his left arm. Heart attack? The thought screamed through the fog, clouding his brain. He tried to call out, to reach the phone lying on the coffee table just yards away, but his limbs felt heavy, unresponsive, disconnected from his urgent commands. He was 58, alone in this sprawling, empty house, utterly helpless. The edges of his vision began to gray. Through the dimming light and the roaring in his ears, he registered movement near the patio door he'd left cracked open earlier. A shape, low, cautious, orange. A cat? The thought felt surreal, dreamlike. He didn't own a cat. Where had it come from? It paused in the entryway, regarding him with wide, unblinking green eyes. It wasn't his imagination. An orange cat, a stranger, stood watching him die. He tried to focus on it, a bizarre anchor in the terrifying storm engulfing him. He saw it take a tentative step forward, then another. It wasn't fleeing from the sight of his collapse. It was approaching. A final wave of dizziness washed over him, pulling him down into a terrifying darkness. His last conscious thought was the absurdity of it all. His life ending not with a bang, but with the silent witness of an unknown, out-of-place orange cat. What happened now? Was this the end? David Chen had built his life around structure and control. As a partner in a prestigious Chicago architectural firm, he thrived on complex projects, demanding schedules, and the pursuit of perfection. But since his wife, Mary, had died suddenly from a brain aneurysm 18 months prior, the structures that once supported him felt like the bars of a cage. Work became his sole focus, a brutal refuge from the echoing silence of the large suburban house they had shared for 25 years. He poured all his energy into a massive new museum project, working relentless hours, fueled by caffeine and takeout, ignoring the warning signs his body screamed at him, the persistent headaches, the escalating blood pressure readings his doctor had cautioned him about, the exhaustion that sleep never seemed to cure. He was drowning in stress and unresolved grief, pushing away concerned colleagues and the infrequent calls from his grown daughter in California. Mary had been the heart of their home, the one who filled it with warmth, laughter, and a quiet passion for nurturing living things. Her garden, rescued orchids, and David vaguely recalled the occasional stray cat she'd feed discreetly near the back fence. David had always been indifferent, even slightly annoyed by the strays. He hadn't wanted the mess or the commitment. Mary, sensing his lack of enthusiasm, had kept her ministrations quiet, especially towards one particularly persistent orange tabby she'd affectionately nicknamed Cheddar, citing his bright color. David only half listened when she mentioned him, dismissing it as one of her harmless eccentricities. The inciting incident wasn't a choice, but a confluence of neglect and chance. That evening, consumed by a looming project deadline and feeling suffocated by the stale air in his study, David had slid open the heavy glass patio door just a few inches, intending to close it later. He never did. Hours later, lost in blueprints and simmering anxiety, he didn't notice when Cheddar, perhaps drawn by the memory of Mary's kindness or the scent of familiarity drifting from the open door, slipped cautiously through the gap. The cat, accustomed to visiting the yard but never venturing inside, explored the quiet house with wary curiosity, eventually settling in the living room just as David's stressed body reached its breaking point in the adjacent study. David's collapse, triggered by acute stress overwhelming his neglected health, was the critical event, rendering him helpless and bringing him face to face with the unrecognized feline link to his past. The stage was set for a rescue neither of them could have anticipated. Cheddar froze as the man crashed to the floor. The loud thump echoed in the unnervingly silent house. His first instinct, honed by years on the streets, was to bolt back out the open door. Danger, unknown, run. But something held him back. The man wasn't moving. The scent of sharp fear, of distress, hung heavy in the air, different from the usual calm or preoccupied aura of the house's lone occupant. This felt wrong. Hesitantly, Cheddar crept closer, low to the ground, ears swiveling, taking in the scene. He approached the man's head, sniffed cautiously at his hair, his still face. No response, only shallow, ragged breathing. Cheddar nudged the man's cheek gently with his head. Nothing. This stillness was profoundly disturbing. He let out a low, questioning meow. Silence. Panic began to flutter in the cat's chest. He circled the fallen man, meowing louder now, the sound sharp and urgent in the quiet room. He rubbed against the man's unresponsive arm, trying to elicit a reaction. Still nothing. Cheddar's meows escalated into frantic yowls, echoing through the large, empty rooms. He ran back and forth between the man and the open patio door, as if trying to physically pull help from the outside world. When the loud meowing failed to change anything, Cheddar's agitation grew. He needed noise, something to break the terrifying stillness, something to attract attention. His gaze fell upon a delicate side table near the window, cluttered with objects that vaguely smelled of the kind woman who used to leave food. Small ceramic birds, a framed photo, a crystal paperweight. Driven by instinct and panic, Cheddar leaped onto the table. He batted first at the ceramic bird, sending it skittering across the polished surface. Then, more forcefully, he nudged the framed photo. It teetered, then fell to the hardwood floor with a sharp, distinct crash. He swiped at the paperweight. It rolled and thudded heavily onto the rug. More noise. Good. He yowled again, louder this time, his voice raw. Next door, Rosa Diaz paused her late-night channel surfing. She'd faintly heard a cat meowing earlier, not unusual in this neighborhood, but attributed it to typical feline disputes. But the crash was different, sharp, sudden, distinctly inside David Chen's house. She muted the TV, listening intently. Now the meowing was louder, more persistent, almost desperate sounding. Strange. David lived alone since poor Mary passed. He kept to himself mostly, seemed stressed lately whenever she saw him heading out early or coming home late. She knew he didn't have a cat. Mrs. Diaz hesitated. It was late, nearly 11. Maybe he just dropped something? But the combination, the frantic meowing, the crash, the knowledge he was alone and seemed unwell, sparked a genuine worry. She remembered Mary mentioning David's high blood pressure once. Deciding it was better to be a nosy neighbor than regret doing nothing, she slipped on her robe and slippers and headed next door, her heart beating a little faster. The fate of David Chen now rested on his neighbor's concern, prompted by the desperate actions of a cat he didn't even know. Part 4. Midpoint. Turning point. 1,000 words. Mrs. Diaz approached David's patio door cautiously. The lights were on inside, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The glass door was indeed slightly ajar, just as she'd suspected from the clarity of the sounds. The frantic meowing continued from within, accompanied now by a low, distressed rumble. "David!" she called out softly, rapping gently on the glass. "Mr. Chen, are you all right?" No answer, only the insistent cat cries. Her worry intensified. Taking a steadying breath, she slid the door open another foot, enough to peer inside properly. The sight that greeted her made her gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Just inside the living room, partially obscured by the angle, lay David Chen, sprawled face down on the floor, utterly still. Nearby, a small table was in disarray, shattered ceramic fragments glittering on the floor beside a fallen picture frame, and standing near David's head, yowling insistently, was a large orange cat she'd never seen inside his house before. "Oh, dear Lord," she breathed. Years of looking after her own elderly parents kicked in. Stay calm. Get help. She didn't waste time trying to rouse David herself. She backed out slightly, pulling her own cell phone from her robe pocket with trembling fingers, and immediately dialed 911. "Yes, my neighbor, David Chen, 14 Maple Drive," she spoke clearly, trying to keep the panic from her voice. "He's collapsed on his living room floor, unresponsive. I saw him through the patio door. It looks like he's alone. Well, there's a cat making a racket. That's how I knew something was wrong." She provided the necessary details, answered the dispatcher's questions, emphasizing the urgency. They assured her paramedics were being dispatched immediately. Ending the call, Mrs. Diaz pushed the door open wider. "David, can you hear me? Help is coming," she called, her voice shaking slightly. She didn't want to disturb anything, but she needed to check if he was breathing. She crept inside just far enough to see his chest rise and fall, shallowly but definitely. Relief warred with fear. He was alive, but clearly in dire straits. The orange cat, startled by her entry, darted under a large armchair but continued its low, anxious meowing from its hiding spot. This was the turning point. The mystery of the noise was solved, revealing a critical medical emergency. The cat's frantic signals, initially just a neighborhood nuisance, had been successfully interpreted and acted upon by Mrs. Diaz. Help was now officially on the way, shifting the narrative from suspense and discovery to rescue and consequence. David's life hung in the balance, his survival now dependent on the imminent arrival of medical professionals, an arrival orchestrated by the combined efforts of a concerned neighbor and a surprisingly persistent stray cat. There was no going back. The trajectory of David's life, whether he knew it yet or not, had just been irrevocably altered. The flashing lights of the ambulance and police car bathed the quiet suburban street in an urgent, pulsating glow just minutes later. Paramedics entered swiftly, efficiently, their movements practiced and calm amidst the potential crisis. Mrs. Diaz quickly pointed them towards David, explaining what she had seen and heard. They took over immediately, assessing David's vital signs, administering oxygen, carefully stabilizing his neck before maneuvering him onto a stretcher. David remained minimally responsive, his eyes fluttering weakly as they worked. Mrs. Diaz hovered nearby, answering questions about David's known history, his wife's passing, his stressful job, his seeming isolation. She mentioned the cat again, explaining how its persistent meowing and the sound of crashing objects had alerted her. One of the police officers scanned the room, spotted Cheddar peering out from under the armchair, but the cat wisely stayed hidden from the commotion. Once David was secured and being wheeled out to the ambulance, the focus shifted. The police did a quick sweep of the house, found no signs of foul play, secured the patio door, and thanked Mrs. Diaz for her quick thinking. The ambulance sped away, sirens briefly wailing before fading into the distance. The street fell silent again, leaving Mrs. Diaz standing alone on David's doorstep, shaken. She noticed the orange cat slip out from under the chair and dart back out the now closed patio door, disappearing into the night. Strange, she thought again. Just a stray that happened to be in the wrong place at the right time, or the right place. The scene shifted to the sterile environment of the hospital's cardiac care unit. David drifted in and out of consciousness for the next day. Tests confirmed he hadn't had a full heart attack, but a severe cardiac arrhythmia and hypertensive crisis brought on by prolonged, unmanaged stress and exhaustion. The cardiologist spoke to him bluntly when he was more lucid. "Mr. Chen, you're lucky. Lucky your neighbor found you. Lucky this wasn't catastrophic this time. But this is a major warning sign. You need to make significant changes to your lifestyle immediately. Reduce stress, take your medication religiously, change your diet. Follow up with me and your primary care physician. Your body simply cannot sustain the level of stress you've been putting it under." The words hit David hard. He felt weak, vulnerable, and deeply scared. Lying in the hospital bed, tubes connecting him to monitors that beeped with unsettling regularity, he was forced to confront his own mortality and the path he'd been on since Mary died. He'd used work as an anesthetic, burying his grief under impossible deadlines and overwhelming pressure. It had almost killed him. His daughter flew in from California, concerned, but also gently chiding him for neglecting himself. Colleagues sent flowers and emails urging him to take it easy, while simultaneously hinting at the ongoing demands of the museum project. The brief visits and calls only underscored his underlying loneliness, the absence of Mary's steadying presence more acute than ever. Mrs. Diaz visited once, bringing flowers from her garden. "So glad you're doing better, David," she said kindly. "That was quite a scare. Good thing that noisy cat raised such a fuss, eh? Never did see it again after the ambulance left." David nodded vaguely, his mind still foggy, focused more on the daunting medical pronouncements than the details of his rescue. A cat? He barely remembered seeing it. Just a stray, he supposed. He spent nearly a week in the hospital before being discharged with a fistful of prescriptions and strict orders for rest and follow-up. Returning home felt surreal. The house was the same, yet entirely different. The silence felt heavier, the familiar rooms alienating. He felt adrift, facing the overwhelming task of changing habits ingrained over decades, managing his health, and somehow finding a reason to do so beyond mere survival. He felt exhausted, depressed, and profoundly alone. The doctor's words about needing to reduce stress seemed like a cruel joke. How could he possibly do that now? He sank onto his sofa, the prospect of recovery feeling almost as terrifying as the collapse itself. Weeks turned into a month. David moved through a gray fog of recovery. He dutifully took his medications, tried to eat better, and attempted to delegate work, but felt overwhelmed and unmotivated. The huge house felt like a mausoleum. One dreary Saturday afternoon, trying to find something to do besides stare at the walls or worry about work emails, he decided to tackle a task he'd been avoiding for 18 months. sorting through the last few boxes of Mary's personal items stored in the spare room closet. He opened a box labeled Mary, Office and Hobbies, expecting old gardening magazines and craft supplies. Instead, he found photo albums, notebooks, and her old tablet computer. He hadn't looked at it since she died. The pain was too fresh. Now, driven by a mix of boredom and a sudden yearning to reconnect with her memory, he found the charger and plugged it in. After charging, it flickered to life, opening to her home screen, a picture of the two of them smiling on a vacation years ago. A pang hit him. He idly browsed through her files, folders labeled Garden, Recipes, Book Club. Then he saw one simply titled Friends. Curious, he tapped it open. Inside were various subfolders. One caught his eye. Furry Friends. He opened it. It contained hundreds of photos, pictures of birds at the feeder, squirrels on the fence, and then picture after picture of a familiar orange cat. The orange cat, Cheddar. Mary had captured him sleeping in a sunbeam on the patio, eating from a blue ceramic bowl hidden behind the hydrangeas, cautiously looking up at her window. They weren't random snaps. They were portraits, taken with patience and obvious affection. Then David saw the saved notes file within the same folder. He opened it. Mary's familiar handwriting filled the screen in digitized notes. Oct 12. Cheddar came by today. Left him some leftover chicken. He actually let me sit on the steps while he ate. Nov 5. Getting colder. Worried about Cheddar. Tried setting out a box with a blanket, but he won't go near it. Still so skittish. Deck 1. Saw Cheddar looking thin. Wished David understood. Maybe someday I can coax him inside just for the winter. He has such kind eyes. Jan 20. Cheddar waited by the back hedge this morning. It's like he knows my routine. Such a smart boy. David stared at the screen, the words blurring through sudden tears. Cheddar. Mary hadn't just fed a stray. She had known him, named him, worried about him, loved him. This specific cat, the same cat that had wandered into his house on the night he collapsed, the same cat whose frantic actions had alerted Mrs. Diaz, the same cat the paramedics saw. It wasn't a random stray. It was Mary's cat, her secret, furry friend. The realization struck him with the force of an electric shock, sending shivers down his spine. The connection felt profound, almost mystical. Cheddar hadn't just wandered in by chance. He had returned, perhaps drawn by memory, perhaps by something more, and had been there exactly when David needed him most. It felt like a message, a final gift from Mary. This was the emotional climax, the revelation that rewove the fabric of his understanding, his grief, and his rescue. Resolution, 500 words. The discovery on Mary's tablet became the catalyst David desperately needed. It wasn't just about his own survival anymore. It was about honoring Mary's kindness, her legacy. He felt a surge of purpose he hadn't felt since her death. His first mission, find Cheddar. He started putting out food and fresh water in the exact spot by the hydrangeas where Mary's blue bowl used to sit, using the photos as a guide. He sat quietly on the patio steps each evening, calling softly, "Cheddar?" For several days, there was nothing. David felt a pang of fear. Had the cat disappeared for good after the commotion? But then, one evening, a flash of orange appeared at the edge of the yard. Cheddar cautiously approached the bowl, ate quickly, then vanished back into the shadows. Slowly, patiently, Day by day, David rebuilt the trust Mary had started. He talked quietly to the cat, never pushing, letting Cheddar set the pace. Weeks passed. Cheddar began lingering after eating, allowing David to sit closer. Eventually came the day Cheddar rubbed against his legs, the same gesture Mary had likely cherished. With infinite patience, David finally coaxed Cheddar inside, not as a prisoner, but as a resident. Caring for Cheddar gave David a new, gentle rhythm. The routines, feeding, cleaning the litter box, quiet evenings with the cat purring nearby. He finally learned to purr for David, anchored him. He made real changes at work, setting boundaries, delegating responsibility, realizing the museum project wasn't worth his life. He started walking daily, taking his blood pressure medication without fail. He spent time in the garden, finding Mary's old notes helpful, feeling her presence there with him and Cheddar. He reconnected with Mrs. Diaz, sharing the story of Mary and Cheddar, forging a genuine neighborly friendship. The house no longer felt empty. It felt lived in, shared. David Chen, the stressed architect, was slowly replaced by David Chen, the recovering heart patient, the cat owner, the man rediscovering quiet joys. He still missed Mary terribly, but the grief was less raw, softened by the comforting presence of the orange cat who served as a living link to her love. Cheddar, the stray who returned, hadn't just saved David's life. He had helped him find it again.